That was a fascinating discussion. Thank you. You've alluded to a lot of the constraints and the difficulties. The one that strikes me is that by middle school, kids self-select themselves out. They're not interested in this. They're bored with it. If you could do one thing, one specific thing, given the constraints of the politics and the finances and everything else, what would it be to minimize that problem so that we'd have more kids who were considering these careers when they got to middle school or at least high school?
Well, I have two things. Can I cheat?
Yeah.
The first one we've already talked about, which is the nature of the assessments that we're giving. So I think one of the first things I would do is I would invest funds it has to be at a national level. It would have to be a consortium of states, but some support federally for developing assessments that really focus on those new science processes that really, so that kids who have had the kind of project-based experiences really will do better on them. So I'd have one at the elementary level, I'd have one at the middle school level, and so that's one thing I'd do. The other thing I would do is I would really look at having specialist science teachers, and I might do this for math too, for elementary school, because part of the problem is that people that are comfortable with science, and this is somewhat true in mathematics as well, but people who are comfortable in science and who are passionate about science rarely become elementary school teachers. And a lot of elementary school teachers, the only science they ever have is something called science methods. And they don't have really a deep understanding or a passion in science to do it. And it's a lot to ask, to ask a teacher. We ask our elementary teachers to be able to be, fundamentally teachers of literacy and to teach mathematics and science and social studies. It's something that most of them are uncomfortable with. A lot of other countries have specialists in math and science. And I would really look at that.
I think those are great ideas. I support both of them. I've written an editorial and tried to catalyze a movement for middle school kids that's based on my own experience with Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts too. I was never a Girl Scout. I was a Boy Scout. But they have something called merit badges, where you do something intensive. Boy Scouts have like 100 different merit badges, and you have to get 21 to be an Eagle Scout. And so I learned a lot about a few things: knots, radio, pathfinding, canoeing. You chose what you wanted to do. I could see an analogous system for middle school kids for science-related and engineering-related projects. And I think a national movement which would give kids, science badges, and they could do this in school, they could do it out of school. We could have a system of volunteers like the Boy Scouts do to certify whether they pass, so that it's not all on the teachers. It's a great way to use, former teachers and retired people. Anyway, there's been, so I wrote an editorial about this maybe a year and a half ago, and maybe 6 months later there was a meeting in Washington where they got some people together, and there are a few people priming, trying to test this idea, but somebody asked, why can't we do anything quickly in the United States? We just don't seem to be able to. We're such a complex country. The AP exam that was mentioned, biology is going to be redesigned. They're testing it this year. They'll probably give it next year. But that was a result of a 2002 Academy study on AP biology, AP Academy of Sciences study on AP biology, AP physics, and AP chemistry, and AP calculus. It's concluded the calculus was a good course, and the rest of them were a mile wide and inch deep, and they had to be fundamentally reformed. 6 months later, the people came from the College Board of the Academy and said they were going to have it done in 3 years. Okay. So that would have been 2006, but now we're aiming for 2013. So this is a real advantage to small countries. They can move. I mean, and also to countries that have a centralized education system. well, of course, it could be a disaster. They could do the wrong thing or they could do the right thing. You know, so we have this incredibly complex society with, you know, 50 different states supposedly designing their education systems, and all this federal government trying to, you know, torque it with money, and you know, it's incredibly complicated. And we want to accomplish everything. You know, we want to solve all the problems of our society and our schools, which is impossible. So, you know, this is why things go slowly and why it's so hard.
You know, I'd like to say, oh, different person, wherever you are. I'd like to say two different things. And one is that, I don't know if you're familiar with Foldit. It's out on the web at fold.it, which is the URL extension for Italy, but it's very good. It's basically a video game. Anybody can go on, and it's trying to solve the structures, to find the structures of various molecules. And you can start small, you know, and it's just like any other video game. It's like you've got a crazy name and you can win things and get scores and things. Well, in the last 6 months, they've actually, of all the molecules they're working on, two structures have been decoded by gamers approaching it. Now, this is the kind of thing that you're actually doing real science, and any of us could do it. The other thing I'd like to point out, which is I think imperative to this crowd, is that we're living here, we've got Silicon Valley on one side, we've got the world's largest biotech cluster in San Francisco, and the only thing that connects them is US 101. You know, it's like, you've got to be kidding. It's like the Venn diagram kind of looks like this, you know, about overlap. I know so many people who have had tremendous careers and are in mid-career in Silicon Valley who just can't figure out how to get into biotech, and yet the dirty little secret is that, you know, once you digitize it, once you get it into the information system, biotech opens up. It's massive what you can do. Many of the jobs are the same old jobs we've had. So how we can integrate people who are into their careers, who are adults at many ages, and aren't really going to stop. They might stop their traditional career. How we can integrate that actually can end up coming back and having a massive effect on the educational system, because so many of them will understand it better and will help this entire area, which is really ripe for growth, I think. So who is next? We had such politeness. You were, okay, you're going to be next, okay.
I actually have a question for the audience first. The question is this: how many people in the audience are school administrators?
School administrators.
School administrators. All right. Yes, I thought so too. I was afraid of this. I actually am a middle school math teacher, and I sent this invitation to my superintendent, to the principal, and to the assistant superintendent in charge of curriculum and instruction. They're not here. I just wondered if there were any other people in administration. Apparently the answer is no. I got my teaching credential just a few years ago. My undergraduate degree was in math. My master's is in operations research, and I was an Air Force systems analyst. I was a contractor, civilian consultant. So I kind of this is my second career, and I teach, in fact, at the school where my children went to school, and in fact I've taught 3 of my 4 children. So in a sense, I sort of feel like as a teacher I'm a community resource, but because I've had the experience of actually working in industry, I bring that to bear on the work that I do with the middle school kids. But I will say this, getting a teaching credential, to the woman who was asking about that, it's not a matter of intellect, it's a matter of sheer stubbornness and perversity.
That's good for science, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for math, to get the credential, even though I have a master's degree, I had to take 2 math classes, which were wonderful. It's just that I had to take 2 math classes. Then you have to pass 3 5-hour math exams, and then you have to, it goes on, then that's just to get into the program, and then you go through the program, which is fine. I felt that I learned how to be a teacher by actually being a parent volunteer and listening to the other math teachers. How do you talk? How do you ask questions? I also want to say that the amount of math that I need to know in order to teach my middle school kids is something like this in order to teach that. because I'm never sure kind of where they're coming from, and I need to make sure that I understand all the different nuances. And one of the things that I tell my students, which is why I would love to have more people from industry coming in and teaching, and especially middle school, before you lose these children, is there is such a creativity in learning and doing mathematics. It's not some cookbook. And it takes somebody who has kind of that breadth to be able to see that and to be able to grow that in these kids. And if we don't do it now, we're losing this whole generation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to you.
So I'm having a lot of flashbacks to graduate school tonight. One reason is that as I walked in the door, my good friend Roger here, whose son is in a junior and he wants to make sure he finds a good pathway, was one of my mentors in graduate school, and I haven't seen him in 8 years, and he just showed up here tonight. And I can attest that it's those inquiry experiences that stick with you the most, because the things that stuck with me the most were the things that happened in the laboratory with Roger and my thesis advisor and the other graduate students. Another thing I did in graduate school was I taught a lot of inquiry-based physics to in-service teachers and pre-service teachers in the elementary level. And from those experiences, well, let's just say that on the inquiry-based instruction, I drank the Kool-Aid in large quantities, and so this is my passion, and which is why I am on the science committee for my son's elementary school across the bay in Fremont. It's a science magnet school. And I know that there is some inquiry-based instruction happening in the science lab with the science specialist. We're lucky to have a science specialist at that school. But I know that all this vocabulary stuff is happening in the classroom as well. And I can see my first grader bringing these worksheets home and shutting down and turning off, and I have to turn it into this is a fun father and son thing now, and we're going to do whatever we can to make this interesting, because I can't let him shut down. Another thing that came out of my experience with teaching inquiry-based science, and we used simple materials. It can be done on the cheap. And when the most expensive part of that came out, of the most expensive material or a piece of equipment came out onto the table, and that was the calculator with these students, because they had to calculate the mass of something or the kinetic energy of something. And invariably, every semester, there would be somebody who would come up with a negative number for the kinetic energy of something. And because it's technology and it gave them the answer, it must be right. So I'm also very skeptical of technology in the classrooms. I know we're making strides, but I wanted to circle back to these things, the technology with you can't. I think that there's a sort of a desire to find technology that can maybe replace teachers, but I think it can only.
That'll never
it can only.
happen.
Well, any.
Good luck with that. Maybe I should.
Right. And so the one thing that you didn't touch on in the discussion about the graphing calculators and stuff like that is professional development for the teachers. And I keep getting told we cannot ask the teachers to do anything outside of classroom time. And as a member of the science committee, that frustrates me. But then
I'm going to have to ask you to ask a question.
So finally,
You
what?
said lots, so lots of reactions.
So we're trying to get the technology into the classroom. What about getting the technology into the assessments? Instead of filling out bubbles, can Center for Technology and Learning and our CIRI team here at SRI team up and look for those nuances that show you that the student has the reasoning skills, having a conversation with them instead of filling out bubbles? That's my question.
Yeah, I'll respond a little bit about the technology. Like anything else, you want to make sure that the numeracy concept, and what's a reasonable answer is there whether you're using a technology tool or not. And it doesn't really matter whether it's a calculator or a slide rule. You should have some idea of what is a reasonable answer. And part of doing that is part of the reason why we're not going to see technology replace teachers. And we need to have teachers to provide that context, to sometimes be the interface between the technology-based resources and the student, and to be an inspiration and a model of how you think, how you reason, how you attack a problem. So I think all of that is important. And I also say that I think we are at a place where using technology, because there is the simulation capability, because we can have multiple users working on the same simulation. We can actually do analysis of text that's produced to explain concepts, and there now are starting to be systems that can actually differentiate different levels of understanding. I think we're at the point, it would have to be a major mission, a major project, not just for people like at SRI, but other places as well. But I think bringing this together, we could actually produce that kind of assessment. It would make a huge difference.
Now we have time for one more question. This gentleman has been so nice. He's been letting everybody go. Yours is the last question.
Great, thanks. I'm John Massey. Quick question, and if the answer is no, I'll do a real brief explanation and ask you how it might apply here. Talk about small countries. Singapore. Now, Singapore is an odd case. Okay, right? Have you ever visited Republic Polytechnic, which does really intense problem-based learning? Everybody see that? No? Okay, well, it's Singapore, so they decided to make this thing, which is for 17, 18, and 19-year-olds, so it's a little later. But, they did it in about 5 years, typical Singapore. It's about 15,000 students. Every student has a laptop. First week, they teach them how to use Google and figure out whether what they see makes any sense or is credible. Okay. You have 5 classes in a semester. Each class is 1 day long. They give them problems at the beginning. They work in teams of 5 students. They do whatever they do. They hunt in the library. They Google about. And then they put them PowerPoints and come back and present their solutions to the class, who rips them up if they don't do a good job, right? The teachers are more like coaches. They don't do so much of the curriculum design themselves because it's all electronic, right? And they often actually have trained up part-timers because coaching and interaction, everything with the students turns out to work a lot better, right? And so anyway, now that's Singapore, which is an odd case. But let me tell you, I saw 17-year-olds, worrying about Poisson arrival processes and how many whales you were likely to see on things, and there was nobody sitting around with, half asleep. And
It's not movie day?
Pardon?
Not movie day?
No, not at all. No.
We
So the question is, do you think that kind of approach, but done at appropriate levels, could be made to work anywhere in this country?
Is this curriculum available on the web anywhere?
I think some of the stuff is on there. Anyway, Republic Polytechnic is the place. If you ever get a chance to visit, they love to show off. And it's
So you gave me a chance to say something else about Singapore, but I have visited several times. And I went to their Central School Administration, the Department of Science and Math instruction, where they design the curriculum and the professional development and so on. What I was really impressed to see that there were 50 people there. 2/3 of the people in the department were their best teachers, who were spending 3 years on rotation there, would go back to the classroom. This is very important. So they were trying to improve the system that they were going to have to live in. And I asked my host, who was a big shot in the science, he had actually been in the military before. This is they run the military the same way. They run everything the same way. This would be a great thing, kind of thing to do in the United States. What we do instead is we promote teachers out of the classroom. They come into central administration. They forget about the needs of teachers. They get all distracted by the bureaucracy and the reporting to the state needs, and they forget about the needs of teachers, or at least they don't have time to do it. So I think the genius of having people trying to fix a system in which you're going to have to go back in is something we should think about in this country.